Alright, so here's how it went down. I was all set to play Spider-Man Miles Morales on my Mac, which doubles as a PC, but there was a problem. The game gave me graphics issues. And I tried everything, I just could not fix it. So I ended up refunding it. And then I figured, alright, well, might as well start Persona 5 Strikers now. And so I did, and 1 month later, I've finally beaten it. Now here's my video on it. Persona 5 Strikers. Alright, so if you remember, one of my best friends introduced me to Persona 5 Royal a few months ago. I played it, and then I played it again, and then I reviewed it, saying it's one of my new favorite video games of all time. Because it's awesome. Persona 5 Strikers serves as kind of a mini sequel to the original Persona 5. So there's no element of the Royal Edition in Strikers. No Kasumi Yoshizawa, Goro Akechi's not around. Persona 5 Strikers serves as a follow-up to the original Persona 5. And I guess it's also kind of a crossover. They call it a crossover. By crossover, I mean it uses elements from a different game series called Dynasty Warriors, which I've never heard of. Like, the company that made those games collaborated with Atlus to make this game. I mean, the game itself is not like a crossover into any other franchise with other characters and worlds or anything like that. It's really more of a gameplay thing. I'll get into that later. So in Persona 5 Strikers, it's summer vacation. So the protagonist, who I'm gonna call once again by his canon name, Ren Amamiya, he goes back to Tokyo to visit his old Phantom Thief friends, and they're all set to relax and enjoy summer vacation, but somehow the metaverse has returned, even though we thought we got rid of it at the end of the original Persona 5. Now instead of palaces, there are jails, new characters come into the fold, and we have ourselves a new adventure with the Phantom Thieves of Hearts. Now this game, I enjoyed it while I was playing it, but cards on the table, I just don't think it's nearly as good as the original Persona 5. I just don't. And there are quite a few reasons for that. One of the biggest reasons is the characters. Not the new characters, but the ones we already know, the Phantom Thieves. One of my favorite things about the original Persona 5 was getting to know these characters, for the first time. We're just meeting them. And they each had their own different story arcs with each different palace. They had their own confidant missions. So now in this follow-up sequel, we already know these characters. And they don't really have story arcs pertaining to them that are as interesting as they were in the original Persona 5. You're like, yeah, these are the same characters that I already love. Ryuji, Futaba, An, Makoto, Haru, Yusuke. None of them really go through progressive story arcs in this game. You still love them because you grew attached to them in the original Persona 5, but in this game they just don't feel as interesting because it doesn't really do anything new with them emotionally. You know what I mean? I mean, some of them do have little arcs with some of the jails, which I'll get to in a second. And with these little arcs, I do get it, but again, it was kind of a smaller version of what they went through in the original P5. Now that being said, this game introduces a couple of new characters to the mix, and getting to know these characters, I'm like, okay, yeah. This is what I loved about the original Persona 5. Getting to know the characters. So, the new characters in this game. First off, we have an AI named Sophia. Yeah, she is an AI, artificial intelligence. At first you're like, okay, is that really gonna mix well with this whole world? It does, it ends up working out. Sophia joins the Phantom Thieves, and she's one of those curious AIs, she wants to learn more about humanity, what it means to have a heart. And at first I was like, alright, that's kind of cliche. But eventually her story arc does reach a point where I was like, alright, that's pretty cool. I do like her as a character. More interesting character, however, is the other new character, Zenkichi Hasegawa. He's an investigator, he works for public security, and he's initially sent to work with the Phantom Thieves on this case of the metaverse suddenly reappearing and the sudden changes in behavior that people are going through, which is a thing that's happening. And again, at first I was like, I don't trust this guy. I mean, the game actually does show that he is kind of spying on the Phantom Thieves because he does have an ulterior motive. So you're like, I don't know. But then his story arc, when it comes to its climax, I was like, dude, alright, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. This is what's great about Persona 5. No spoilers, but when his story arc reaches its peak, I was really feeling it. Great job on that, Atlus, because that was really well done. That was my favorite part of the story of this game for sure. Now, alright, gameplay-wise. You know how in the original Persona 5 there were palaces. They were ruled by their rulers and you went from palace to palace. Persona 5 Strikers does something kinda similar, but different. Instead of palaces, we have what's called jails this time around. They're ruled by monarchs and they're stealing the desires of the masses. And yeah, at first, I know there's a lot of at first, but at first, I was like, okay, these are essentially palaces, so why not just call them palaces again? But the game does explain how jails are different from palaces, so you're like, alright, fine, at least they give an explanation. And so in Persona 5 fashion, you've taken out monarch after monarch, the story escalates to the point where the end is all epic just like the original Persona 5. In that sense, it's almost kind of a rehash, which is another thing that makes this game not nearly as good as the original P5, is that really the story isn't anything new. The mechanics are kind of different, but story-wise, there's nothing really new here. The biggest difference in this game from the original Persona 5 is the combat. Alright, in the original Persona 5, it was turn-based battles, you know? It was a JRPG. Persona 5 Strikers is not like that at all. Instead, the combat is you are taking on hordes of shadows like a hack and slash game. This is what I imagine was taken from the Dynasty Warriors game franchise. You're just going through these big groups of shadows, you're slashing at them. The word I use to describe it in my head is chaotic. Because it is complete chaos. You're going around, you're like, oh my god. And if I'm being honest, I don't like that as much as the turn-based system from the original Persona 5. Because at least in there you had some sense of control. In here, you don't at first, you're like, this is insanity. Of course, you do get used to it over the course of the game, and it does try to throw some RPG elements in there. Like you can pause the battle to use your persona and use different moves, which kind of disturbs the flow of the battle. Because you're like, oh, hack, slash, fight, alright, pause. Alright, what move do I want to use? Yeah, that's kind of jarring. So it took me some getting used to, but I did get used to it. That being said, I still prefer the original Persona 5's version of combat. I'd rather have that than the clickety-clickety-click of this. However, one thing I love about this game is actually something that the original P5 didn't have, is that while you're exploring the metaverse, while you're exploring the jails, you can actually switch between different Phantom Thieves. You can play as the different Phantom Thieves. When I discovered that, I was like, holy shit, what? You mean I can play as Makoto and explore this jail as Makoto? That is awesome! Yeah, why couldn't I do that in the original Persona 5? That was kind of a missed opportunity, but I love doing it in here. Because again, Makoto is still a badass. I just love that character. And also in combat, you can switch between the Phantom Thieves, use different moves, baton pass to each other, pull off combos, it's all good. And at some points in this game, you get into what are called hacking battles, which is you have Futaba over here, she's working on hacking like a door or something, getting it to open, and you just have to take on waves of shadows as they come and try to attack Futaba. I was like, oh, if you lay one finger on Futaba, I will come at you like the plagues came to the Egyptians. And so those battles were pretty fun. But that's actually another thing I don't like about this game, is that, you know, in the original Persona 5, there were romances. You could romance a number of the characters. This game ignores any romance you did in the previous game. It's like that never happened. Come on, that's a bummer. I mean, such a big part of Persona 5 is character relations, at least in my eyes. Persona 5 Strikers does away with a lot of that. The confidant missions are completely gone. They're not in this game at all. You do have these little, like, request missions that you can do, and sometimes I did them, but towards the end of the game, I just ignored them, because I didn't really need to do any of that to help me to beat the game. There's also this bond system where you can up your buffs, you know? That was all fine and dandy. I did that a lot, actually. So that was a good mechanic. Again, I don't prefer it to the confidant missions, but I'll take it. I do like the fact that in this game, we pretty much get a tour of Japan. Yeah, this game is actually like a road trip. The Phantom Thieves are going all over Japan because there are jails all over the place. This is a nationwide problem. So we get to see a lot of Japan. I don't know if it's like accurate to how Japan actually is, but we see places like Sendai, Osaka, Kyoto, Okinawa. And I was like, all right, cool. That's a nice change of pace from the original P5. Seeing new places. That's neat. So props to that. And the game's length. The original Persona 5, the first time I played it, it took me a month and a half to beat. Persona 5 Strikers, it took me about a month. But if I'm comparing the hours played, my first time playing the original P5, it was like over 100 hours easily. Persona 5 Strikers took me about 45 hours to beat. And I thought about it, and it's because when I was playing the original Persona 5, I would just sit there for hours a day. Like I said, sometimes 6 hours would go by when I was playing that game. With this one, that never really happened. I would play for a couple hours, then I would get bored and turn it off for the day. Which actually is usually how I am with video games. Again, that shows you how good the original Persona 5 is. So this game took me a month to beat, but I would spend less time every day playing it. So the fact that this game isn't nearly as long as the original Persona 5, I can't say that justifies it being the same price as the original Persona 5. 60 bucks? I honestly don't think that's worth it for Strikers. I was lucky, I actually got this game during the Steam Winter Sale, so I got it for like half the price. That I would say is worth it. Full $60 price? No, I would not say that is worth it, especially when compared to the original P5, which is absolutely worth 60 bucks. Yeah. Lastly, I'm gonna talk about the soundtrack, because this soundtrack is interesting. There are some tracks on here that are like newer versions of songs from the original P5, like a rock version of Rivers in the Desert, and I was like, alright, well, they certainly tried something new. There are some points in the game where they use the exact track from the original Persona 5, so that was cool. And then there are some completely original tracks that are exclusive to this game. My favorite has got to be Loving Wonderland. It's the music that plays in the very first jail you visit. It's actually literally themed after Alice in Wonderland. The music that plays here is this awesome dance music. Love that shit. All in all, the soundtrack is alright. But again, not nearly as awesome as the soundtrack for the original Persona 5. And really, that's this game as a whole. In conclusion, I enjoyed this game, but I don't see myself playing it again, at least not right away or anytime soon. The way I see it, it's kind of like the Kingsman movies. The first one came out and it blew my mind. I was like, holy shit, this is an entirely new concept. I love everything about it. Then the sequel came out and I was like, alright, I'm kind of wise to the act now. It introduces new stuff, but it's not as interesting as the introduction to that world. It's fine, but if I'm gonna invest myself in one of them, it's gonna be the first one. It's just miles better. But hey, that's just my opinion. So, Persona 5 Strikers. Have you played it? What are your thoughts on it? And what is your favorite video game sequel of all time? That's a good question. Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And of course, thank you for subscribing. Peace!